Estate, when you go from one factory to another factory, pretty much all of the large factories are well run and well operated, and we all essentially do the same thing. So what you saw yesterday in Hoya, Nicaragua was pretty prototypical of how a cigar factory operates. And what ends up happening is that same basic mechanism is then applied individually in each of the distinct factories, which then become their own. So what I'm going to concentrate more on, rather than telling you guys what Mario did yesterday, the basic mechanics of how to make a cigar and the process and whatnot, I'm going to try to highlight more of the differences that I think make Drew Estate different than some of the other factories. You know, one of the things that right off the top of my head that makes Drew Estate significantly different is this is a factory that has no lineage. This is traditionally a business that is a family business that's passed down generation to generation. It's so you normally have a great-grandfather, a grandfather, a father, and so forth. And maybe they weren't factory owners, but they were somebody that worked in pilons, or they were someone that worked in tobacco, or somebody that worked, you know, in production. And they you know, as they go through the generations, they eventually get to the point that they have a factory. Drew Estate is a factory that essentially was created out of nothingness. It was essentially Jonathan Drew with his partner Marvin Samuel. Jonathan moving down here in the early, it'd be like the early 90s, not the early 90s, the late 90s. And he just basically came here, he just simply didn't know any better. He was just full of a lot of enthusiasm, and probably at that stage his naivety helped him, because if he had known better he wouldn't have done it. And he came down here and he got a little room, and he ended up with 4 workers, and he decided he was going to learn how to make cigars on his own. And it pretty much started from that. And I mean, at this point today, the factory, from that humble start, today we employ about 964 people in total between the various operations here in Esteli. We produce on average about 69 to 72,000 cigars handmade every single day. And you know, we are the #1 largest dollar exporter of premium cigars in the country in Nicaragua. Another thing that makes the factory kind of unique, other than the fact that it really comes from nothingness to something, is the fact that the culture background. There is no Cuban heritage at all. If you go through our factory, it is entirely a Nicaraguan run operation. Everybody inside the factory is Nicaraguan. And that's not so much because there aren't plenty of wonderfully talented Cubans, but as a philosophy, we find that the structure of having an entirely Nicaraguan operation provides a unique work environment that's the best for us to produce cigars. So that's another thing that makes Drew Estate a very unique factory. The third thing that makes the factory very unique is most factories have a very particular genre of products they make. Lido has a certain flavor style, Pepin has a certain flavor style, Fuente has a certain flavor style. So you know, if you like Ashton Villas cheese, you're probably gonna like Aeneas. You're probably gonna like Don Carlos. It's kind of, you know, different degrees, because ultimately in any factory environment, cigars that end up getting put in boxes are determined by the principals, and the principals have to like them in order for them to go in the box. That's not the case necessarily in our factory. In our case, our factory has such a wide variety of diverse products, not just from a branding perspective, you know, different names and different packages, but wildly different tastes. I mean, the consumer that smokes an acid cigar is not probably the same guy that's reaching to smoke natural roots, probably not the same guy that's smoking Liga Privada. So I always find it very peculiar when somebody comes up and says, "Oh, I love every cigar you make," because I don't love every cigar we make. You know what I mean? Because every cigar we make is for somebody different and for what they get out of it pleasure-wise. Me, I happen to be a big Liga Privada smoker. That's what I happen to personally like for my taste buds. You know, but everybody, so we try to make a product that's not just different in branding, but also different in smoking style, body, texture, flavor. So that makes it very unique, because it's you really can't pigeonhole what we do in the Drew Estate factory compared to other factories. What else makes Drew Estate unique? Well, I'm incredibly handsome. No, I'm trying to think. You know, the other thing that makes Drew Estate very unique, and this also stems back to the hierarchy of the culture. Drew Estate is a factory where people can exceed their station in life. You know, typically in this type of culture, if your father was a farmer, you're a farmer, your grandson will be a farmer. And this is a situation where we really actually reward the people that work hard and are smarter and better than the others. Case in point, Manuel Rubio. He's the general manager of our factory. To be the general manager of a factory with 900 plus people in Nicaragua, you're a pretty important man. Well, in most locations here, you would have to be college educated and you would have to come from a family with the right name, or you would have to be Cuban, coming from the right background. Rubio started off as a driver, okay? That's what Rubio did, okay? But he's very smart. He's a very hard worker. He's very honest. He's a great taskmaster. That allows Rubio to exceed his station in life. You don't get trapped in it. And that's one of the things that makes the factory very, very unique, is that. Because that is not something that Nicaraguan culture has not become Americanized in any way. And so it's a little bit of that American kind of work ethic trying to be interjected into this type of environment. And that served us very well, because everybody in the factory that's a certain station, they all started at a much lower rung on the ladder. And I would never ever, for example, there are plenty of great tobacco and cigar people here in Esteli, and many of them I know that I would love to work with, and Jonathan I would assume would love to work with, but we never will. Because we'll never bring somebody from outside the factory into the factory and put them in the mix, regardless of how talented or skilled they are. Because ultimately, a factory is it's a machine, it's a team, and having that grow from the bottom up always gives people incentive to do more and do better. And you see it, like, for example, the person who's in charge of our leaf analysis, really the person who's in charge of our primary tobacco person, it's a woman. Her name's Yesenia Moncada. She is wonderfully gifted with tobacco, but because of her sex, very unique position. I can only think of two other women that I know of that have ever been in this type of position. One of them being Modesta, who used to be with General, which was Daniel Nunez's right hand, and then over at Nick Perdomo, he has Sarah Gonzalez from Cuba, and she's incredibly gifted. But it's a very, very, very small club for women, very few in that type of position. So there's a lot of things that when you look around that makes our factory environment different than other ones. Another case would be the age of our workforce. We have a much younger workforce than almost every other factory I've ever been in my life. And the reason for that is we would prefer to train somebody from scratch to make cigars the way we want them to make them, rather than get somebody who's very skilled that comes into it with a preconceived notion or a methodology of how to make a cigar. And it's very hard to take someone who's really gifted and to change the way they make a cigar, because think about it like how you drive a car. Remember when you were 16, you were learning to drive a car, you had your hands at 2 and 10, you're checking your rear view mirror, you're paying attention to the line in the middle of the road to make sure you're in the center of the lane, you're really concentrating on driving. And now when you drive, you got your Big Mac in one hand, your cell phone in the other hand, you're playing with your XM stereo, you're sparking your cigar, you just drive. You don't even think about how you drive, you just drive, that's what you do. Okay, well, it's the same thing for these people that are working on the factory floor producing cigars. For them, it's really just an inherent memory reaction, emotion. Because you have to figure, depending on what they're producing in a given day, they're making anywhere from 225 up to as many as 600 cigars a day in a Fuma grade. Their hands just move. They just do what they do by nature, okay? So it's physically impossible to take somebody who knows how to make it one way and to try to get them to make it even just slightly different. Because what will end up happening is, even though they try, after a week or two they'll slip back to what they're used to doing. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that what they're used to doing isn't very good, but it isn't what we want them to do. So we find it much easier to go through the pain in the front end to train someone to make a cigar from scratch than it is to try to take someone who has a lot of experience. And that, in turn, is what gives us such a young workforce. So the combination of that young workforce, this kind of Americanized work ethic, this all Nicaraguan operation, the fact that you have owners that are a little bit crazy and really have no basis in any sort of set standard, it kind of creates an environment that's very unique compared to most factory environments. It's got a much different vibe. And have you guys even been on the production floor yet? All right, you'll understand when you walk out there. But right now we're at what we call pre-industry. With pre-industry, well, let's just walk inside and we'll go from there.